Welcome back, boys and girls. In this video, we're going to be talking about why and when would you want to use scoped services and then how you're actually going to use them, right? So a while back, I made a video about scoped services where some people left comments which made me think, do people really understand why would you want to use scoped services? And then the fact that they wanted to do some things that my example didn't provide made me think you don't actually know how to consume scoped services in, let's say, an optimal manner. So I thought I'd try to address these points in this video. So if you're enjoying it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section. And don't forget to check out the description, and let's go ahead and get started. So we have the application over here. We have some code to go through, nothing too complicated. We have a program CS where we're going to be talking about scoped services in the background service, so consumed in a singleton. And then, I think the highlight will be like we have an in-memory database, and we're going to be changing it to support multi-tenancy, okay? So before we do all of that, let's go ahead and relearn why you would want to use a scoped service. So first of all, we're going to have a little illustration where once you have an HTTP request, you might surface a service. Okay, so some kind of class is going to get instantiated. This class in the constructor may accept another parameter. So once you have these classes, they are going to have functions inside of them, right? So these are square functions, and you're going to have execution go for one function and then for the next and then out. Okay. For the span of this execution, you want to record state or share state. And that is what a scoped service is. This is what allows you to effectively create something that is going to be injected into the red service and into the orange service, identical the same instance, not identical instances, but the same instance, and whatever is going to be written here will be available here as well. Okay. Otherwise, the DB context is a scoped service. So, for example, things that are written here, by the end, when you come around here, you can call DB save changes to the database, and they're going to be written to the database. So this kind of pattern of execution where over some kind of span, you are aggregating some kind of information and then batching it and doing something with it. It's a unit of work. But otherwise, you can also do something along the lines of where at the beginning, you're setting up some kind of information to then later be consumed across all of your services, okay? So with the multi-tenancy example, we're going to be looking at this latter scenario. Before we dive any deeper, what you need to understand is what you currently see on screen is a bad idea. Okay, it's a bad idea for two reasons, and these two reasons contribute towards most of the complexity in software. Okay, the first reason is complicated control flow. The second reason is shared state. Okay, so these two reasons, as soon as you have a shared state or complicated state where stuff gets set up somewhere over there and now it's being used over here, or you're in this part of code and you have this information here that was set up somewhere over there. So again, you're no longer reading things start to finish. You have to know the context of your application, and you need to know that, okay, when this is happening, that thing is happening, and in order to get to the state where you understand that, you need to do a lot of work and a lot of learning, and you have to be familiar with the application that you're working with, okay? So it's generally a pain to figure out, and as I'm going to be going through this example, you're going to see that, yes, this actually doesn't look comfortable, and if you forget to do the setup, everything down the line breaks, okay? So with that in mind, again, we're going to remember two reasons: shared state, complicated control flow, and 90% of the time you don't want to be using scoped services. Most of the time is, yes, when you want to share state between services because you are constrained by the dependency injection environment. There is nothing, I don't know if it will let me redraw here. Ah, perfect. there is nothing that allows you to say, okay, whatever state, whatever this red arrow state, whatever you wanted to record, you're not allowed to just pass it along to the orange module and then continue working with it, slowly aggregating it across your modules. You have to keep shoving it up to this shared service, okay, and retaining all of the information there. Whenever we want to cross boundaries between services, we have to rely on scoped services, and partly this is what the DB context example is going to be doing. Let's go ahead and quickly have a look or like a refresher of what I was explaining in that other video. I'm going to not type that character, but run the application, and I have the example here where this scoped service is going to be local to the Lambda, and then this service which I showed in the other video where effectively this service which you're going to get from this scoped service is going to be within its own scope. Okay, and a lot of people will step over the example but complaining that you're only getting one service from here. What if I need to? Okay, what if I need to? I'll show you what you do if you need two services. Okay, so the point here is that once you do things in a different scope, they are not shared with this outer scope. Okay, so this is in Lambda, this is in scope. We're gonna set the value in scope. Okay, coming to the browser, the value in scope is set, in Lambda not set, right? Because the boundaries between scoped services aren't crossed. You would have to use a singleton service for that. Okay. With that, let's go ahead and build up another example, now consuming the database, and slowly traverse into this multi-tenancy scenario. Okay, first of all, what we're going to need is an endpoint with a database. Let's also give it a body. And what we're going to do is just return all of the nodes. Make sure we put it on the nodes route, duplicate it, and do the same for something like create node, where we're going to create a random node. And there we have it. So two of our endpoints. Let's go ahead and restart the application. Now we're going to go take a look at this. So /nodes, we're going to have an empty array. We're going to create a node. We're going to get OK. And now we have a value in our array. Okay, so pretty standard stuff. Now, if we want to change to which database this is saving, so let's say we'll also be able to specify the database to which we're saving, or rather I'll just say name. Okay, I will need to set the name sometime before I'm actually consuming the database service, right? Because that's just how it's gonna go. I am using an in-memory database, which is just my DB. I want a different value here. I'm already registering this scoped service over here, and it's really simple, right? It's just something that is going to contain some value. So we need to do this setup before we start consuming the database. So in the constructor of your, it went to the wrong file. In the constructor of the database, we're going to accept a scoped service. So scoped service, just add a field. And when we're going to be using the database, this is the value that we're going to be supplying over here, right? So we're going to be using an in-memory database with this value. So from the beginning, it is going to be empty. And let me just set this to null because we're not going to be using it. I'll restart the application and we're just going to reach this error, right? So cannot be null. Stop the application. We are going to get the scoped service. So scoped service, I'll just call it scope. We're going to take the value and we're going to set it to the name. And we're going to actually require this. We're going to do the same for the database. And generally, you would have this kind of setup logic in the middleware. And this is, again, where if you're new to the application and all of this stuff happening in the middleware, this is where you have to take a look at, okay, this code is executing here. And how does it actually know, or how does it figure out some of the parameters in this code that is consumed here? This is where, again, you have to understand the control flow. You would have to go to all of these different you would have to go to the program file or wherever the middleware defined, see the order of the middleware, and then check each module of the middleware, or like see what each middleware is doing. And only then can you understand, okay, all of this stuff is happening in this order before this thing happens. Okay, so this is where, again, if some state is being set up, this is what causes complexity. Shared state and then confusing control flow. Okay, but anyway, we are doing this, and we're gonna do the same thing over here when we're adding. Okay, with this, let's go ahead and run the application. We're gonna go over here, and string parameter name is not defined. So name, let's say we're gonna go to DB and nothing is here. If we want to create note in DB, and let me duplicate this over here, I'm then gonna go to notes. It's right there. I'm also going to refresh this. We're gonna have 2 notes now, but let's say I want DB2. There is nothing there. Okay, so now if I want to start populating notes in DB2, I would go here, and there is 1 note here. And if I want to go to the first DB, there are these other notes. Okay, so well done. We have achieved multi-tenancy. If you want to do this with SQL database, you're just swapping out a connection string or just the database name, standard stuff. Hopefully this illustrates the point that, again, scoped services are complicated because you need to surface something additional. You need to perform some kind of setup. When once you're in the database, you are kind of expecting this code to have ran, or this setup to have ran, without anything here ensuring that it would run. Okay, so this kind of code writing just is a little bit awkward. And you can feel that it's awkward, even though that is, it's doing something amazing. And the reason that we have to do this slightly awkward thing is because we are constrained by the dependency injection container. This is just how you would have to work in this sort of environment, okay? If the database would allow us to pass a parameter through a function where we're saying database, for this tenant, do these things, then the control flow is obvious. It's not being set somewhere over there where we can't see. Here it's a little bit obvious because it's right here in front of us. So hopefully at this point you can see a little bit more why you would want to use a scoped service. And the way that we're using it here or setting it up, there isn't much wiggle room around, how to use it. Now, all that you can do is really build tools for yourself in order to say that, okay, this service, we better use it with this other service. If we're ever in a place where one hasn't ran before the other, our application crashes. So now what you have to do is what I explained in that video, is a neat scope. The reason it's neat is because it allows you to have a scoped operation. I said also that this is more for giving you ideas on how to work with a scoped service. What I meant by that is whatever scoped operation you have, it's gonna want certain things to happen in certain order before certain things can occur. Okay, if you define that in a module and surface that in a module, you can just say, give me this module, give me this operation where things are scripted in the correct order and execute it. Okay, so that might still not make sense. So we're going to be addressing the point of how do I resolve more than one service from this? Okay, and for this, we're going to be going to the background service example. And we're going to be actually doing the same thing as we're doing here. Okay, so in the background, I'm just going to slap this over here. I'm not going to have the return statement. We will have the constructor. So you can do this multiple ways. You can use the service provider to create a scope. Internally, this create scope will resolve an iService scope factory, which is the same thing that I'm using here. Okay, so service provider, you can get any service. iService scope factory, you can just create the scope. So it's a little bit more fit for the job of what you're trying to do, to create a scope. Okay, and because in the background service is a singleton scope, is a singleton service, there is no scope there in order to have a scoped service. So you need to create a scope inside of here. Okay, so service scope factory. Let's go ahead and instantiate this. And while this is going to be running, we want to go ahead and create a scope in which things will be happening. And then we want to get our services, which is going to be the scoped service and the database. And before we use the database, we will have to set the scoped service to some kind of name. So let's go ahead and set it to DB. then we're going to be adding this, and there we go. So once this background service starts up, it is just gonna go ahead and seed the DB with the DB name with the following nodes. And this is what people were confused about. So they want two services. They want this and this, or usually what you would see is something like this. You're trying to do something. You're trying to do a thing. And what's crazy is what you want to do when you want to do a thing is you create a thing which is going to do a thing, which is going to be consuming all of these services that you want to surface over here, but you're going to be doing it in an organized manner. You're going to create a thing which is doing the thing, okay? So over here, we're creating a node. So we're going to, create a thing for this purpose. Let's go ahead, take this, move this over here. And let's say, what should we return? Some kind of Boolean, let's say true, okay? And make this asynchronous. And there we go. Obviously, you can have parameters over here. Let's say for now, just return a Boolean. So we have a service. Let's go ahead, just make sure we register it. This transient, most of the time, you just want transient. You want a new class all the time. This is what you should be defaulting to, unless you know that you want a scoped or a singleton. All right. So coming back to in the background, you want your create node. And the point here was that when you have your iScoped create node, you have your scoped operation that happens. Okay. The only problem here with this example is that we are doing this whole thing with this tenancy thing in mind. So what you want to do, and what I hoped people would take away from the previous video, is say, oh, okay, so I have this scoped service, which once I have this scoped operation, I can create a module which can be just ran in a scope. I can then, people can then adapt this to their solution. So for example, if you're in a multi-tenanted scenario where you need this value to be set here, you're going to be creating something that looks like this. So not just scope, but with tenant scope. Okay. You're still going to be accepting some kind of service. We're not going to be following that particular interface. And this here is the main thing that is going to change, right? You're no longer just returning a service. You want to return something generic. We're going to say run. You will be getting it to your result. And with a tenant scope, you're going to run something within the context of a tenant, right? So there you specify a tenant. What are you doing? You are going to allow the user to specify what they want to do with the service, right? Otherwise, if all of your services are following some kind of identical interface, you can just flat out execute the action here, right? But otherwise, you are going to get a result. And what's going to happen is you're going to take this thing here, right? Slap it over here. And now you have a module that helps you work with the structure that you have and ensures that whenever you're doing an operation, you have set up the tenant correctly. And you're not setting it up as you're doing here. You're resolving services manually and you're orchestrating them together. You have a module for that. You have this module and you have this other module, which are already in place. And then you also have another construct here, which says, okay, all of these modules I have something that executes them correctly. And that's really the only time you will need something like this when you're working with scoped services, okay? Because you want things to be initialized in the correct order, all right? So finally, you're gonna have your T also. So this is just a service, which we're going to resolve here. We're going to pass this service, and then you're going to get a result. Okay. So with tenant scope, that is what you're going to get over here. What do we want? We want to create a node within tenant scope. So create or within tenant. So got inconsistent. Just make this public real quick. Come back to here. Set this up. So now when we're taking this with tenant, what we're doing is with tenant run, we're going to be setting the DB. We have our create nodes, and super simple, we're just saying create async, right? If you need to pass some kind of arguments in here, you can, but in the end, you wait on it, you get your result. You can do something with that if you want, but you no longer have orchestration going on, because just by simple definition in the constructor you already did the orchestration, and the dependency injection container has done all of that hard work for you. So let's say you need to do multiples of these. If run is appropriately resetting things here, potentially what you do is you make a scoped service which is constantly creating a new scope, so you can run a within tenant scoped operation in each new scope, right? So you wouldn't have to do any kind of resetting, because you might be seeding for this, you might be having some kind of background job that runs across all of your tenants and does something with each tenant, right? So then you have more of a grab all of these tenants from the database and execute all of these different operations against all of these different tenants. Perhaps then you want this to be a singleton service and have constantly resolving a new scope and run each new operation against that new scope. Again, this is just meant to be more of like a gateway, right, into, okay, I can create a thing that can operate on things in a scope. How I can customize this to help me work with my scoped services is up to you, okay? I'm not saying that this is a silver bullet for all scoped things. I'm saying this is a direction that you can move in, okay? And this is just a build up upon this, and which one you're gonna need is going to depend on your scenarios, okay? So anyway, let's go ahead and see this work, because not much is needing resetting here between scopes. We're fine just setting a new tenant before we start doing new operations, and we're just gonna go ahead and reset the database. Obviously getting an exception because it's not registered. Let's actually do what I've just talked about. So let's say I will, don't want to grab the whole line. Let's say I will register with tenant scope, or I'm not going to have an interface, so just the implementation. This is going to be singleton and service scope factory. Singleton isn't really going to get disposed, and actually editing the wrong service. So it isn't going to get disposed. We're going to have the result over here. Which we are going, actually, do I even need that? I don't think I need that. Each time I'm going to perform a new operation, that is when I'm going to resolve a scope, okay? Because this is now singleton. So let's have scope. This no longer needs to be disposable, and there we have it. So it's a singleton. Every single time I'm going to be performing this operation, I'm going to get a fresh new DB context and a fresh new what's it called, the scraped service, a scoped service, which is going to be empty and can get reinstantiated with the same value. So, and all of the other change tracking things which I'm going to get as part of this other service are going as part of the DB service, which is going to be injected. And if I'm using a DB context, all of the change tracking is going to be gone as well. Okay. So with that in mind, again, let's go ahead and start this up. There we go, it's running. So which did we see? Do we see the DB and DB2? So for DB, we should have 1 there, and for DB2, we should have 2 there, right? And if we just create 1 more, we'll have 3, okay? And that's pretty much it. Hopefully you have a better understanding of scope services, why, when, and how you want to be using them. To reiterate the points that scope services, because they operate in the nature of shared state, just because of the dependency injection container, you have isolation between services if you actually want to traverse information between them, which you cannot do through functions. You will have to do through scoped services by loading up information into them. Again, this will cause complexity in terms of flow of control, because you have information somewhere which came from somewhere over there, and you have to, work harder to trace that back. And shared state, again, where did this state come from? Where is it being changed? Can I depend on this state being correct there all the time, right? So that's just the nature of the scoped services. As long as you're ready to deal with these two complexities, you can enable communication between services. If you don't need this communication, just go with transient services. You don't need to use scoped services. And then once you actually have your scoped operations, try to define them as modules. That makes them reusable, and you no longer have these concoctions laying around your code base. You have a well-defined thing that you can trigger at any point in the application. Again, hopefully you've enjoyed watching this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. If you would like the source code for this video as well as my other videos, please come support me on Patreon. I will really appreciate it. A big and special thank you goes out to all of my current Patreon supporters. You help me make these videos. As always, thank you for watching. Have a good day.